con ligandos imido que son particularmente activos en reacciones de metátesis de cierre de anillo. Pero muy especialmente debe destacarse su reciente aportación a la reducción catalítica de nitrógeno, mediada por un catalizador de molibdeno. Este descubrimiento ha permitido demostrar por primera vez que es posible replicar la transformación biológica de nitrógeno atmosférico en amoníaco, lo que puede abrir unas importantes expectativas futuras. El número de sus publicaciones frisa las 500, fundamentalmente sobre catálisis homogénea y química organometálica de los metales de transición, temática sobre la que ha realizado también varias patentes. Su prestigio internacional se fundamenta en una obra científica de veras impresionantes. No quisiera abrumarles con una presentación pormenorizada de las muchas y valiosas contribuciones que ha realizado, pero sí me gustaría recordar sus contribuciones seminales en la química de compuestos catiónicos de rodio iridio, que continúan siendo ampliamente referenciadas en la literatura científica internacional. Estos trabajos, realizados en la Universidad de Harvard con John Osborne, abrieron la puerta a importantes desarrollos académicos industriales, una temática en la que nuestro Instituto Universitario de Catálisis Homogénea y el Departamento de Química Inorgánica de la Universidad de Zaragoza ha venido trabajando durante varias décadas. A lo largo de su brillante carrera ha dirigido 68 tesis doctorales y recibido alrededor de 80 visitantes para la realización de estancias postdoctorales. Ha recibido numerosas distinciones, entre las que se podría destacar el mencionado Premio Nobel de Química en 2005, el Premio Cotton de la Sociedad Química Americana en 2006, la Medalla von Neumann de la Sociedad Química Alemana en 2005, la Medalla Wilkinson en 2002 y un largo etcétera. Además, es miembro del consejo editorial de numerosas revistas de la especialidad. Es también miembro de la National Academy of Science y de la American Academy of Arts and Science. El profesor Schrock ha sido conferenciante plenario invitado en numerosos congresos internacionales y han sido muchas y muy prestigiosas las universidades e instituciones que han tenido el privilegio de contar con la presencia del profesor Schrock, bien como profesor visitante o como recipiendario de prestigiosas lectureships. El profesor Schrock es sin duda un químico de relevancia universal, que ha demostrado una inteligencia excepcional al ser capaz de relacionar conceptos en todas las áreas de química en las que ha trabajado. Estos conceptos de síntesis, estructura, reactividad y actividad catalítica los ha relacionado de un modo magistral. Y como el premio Nobel reconoció al distinguirlo con el premio Nobel en el año 2005, es uno de los científicos más relevantes de las últimas décadas. No quisiera concluir este elogio sin dejar de mencionar que al gran talento del profesor Schrock hay que añadir su perfil humano, su generosidad y honradez, su filosofía de la vida y la enorme repercusión de sus aportaciones científicas le han conferido, a pesar de su modestia personal, un claro liderazgo internacional. Para muchos de los químicos de mi generación, el profesor Schrock no es solo un ejemplo de lo que debe ser un científico, sino que vemos en él un hombre feliz, sabio y modesto, apasionado por su trabajo que todavía nos sirve como ejemplo y acicate. No creo necesario aportar más argumentos para convencer a los oyentes de la excelencia del candidato. Por otra parte, estoy seguro que este doctorado permitirá incrementar las excelentes relaciones y actividades que nuestra Universidad de Zaragoza mantiene con el Instituto Tecnológico de Massachusetts, que desde hace años cooperan en el Zaragoza Master of Engineering en Logistics and Supply Chain Management. Pienso sinceramente que si es cierto que esta universidad, con sus más de 400 años de historia, honra a quienes distingue, no lo es menos que ella se honra, y mucho, al recibir entre sus doctores por primera vez a un premio Nobel. El profesor Richard Schrock, un gran científico que nos ilumina con su sabiduría y nos honra con su amistad. Por todo ello, en nombre del Instituto Universitario de Catálisis Homogénea, tengo el honor de solicitar a vuestra excelencia, señor rector magnífico, el título de Doctor Honoris Causa para el profesor Richard Schrock. Muchas gracias.
Debate. Conceditisne ut Vinton Cerf et Richard Schrock honoris causa munia doctoris indeatur? Autoritatis mi concessa regibus regni et studi generalis civitatis Caesar Augustana. Vobis confero gradum doctoris honoris causa. Patroni insignibus doctoralibus vos bestiem. Et eorum significationem explicabus. Sedete.
Profesor Don Vinton G.
Actúan ellos solos, ¿no?
Architectilium unum solum splendor et ceteros preteras, sed poetiam tanquam Minerve, cassive acertamin munitiosis. En librum apertum ut scientiarum arcana reseres. En clausum ut eram pro oportea intimus rectori custodias. Docili facultatem legendi, intelligendi et interpretandi.
Profesor Don Richard Schrock.
Cuando termine esto, tienes que decir levántate. Cuando termine ello. Tiene que hablar el secretario general primero.
Accipifileum non solum splendore ceteros presebas, sed poetiam tanquam Minerva cassive certamen munitiosis. El librum apertum instiarum arcana reseres. Clausum eadem pro oportea intimo pectore custodias. Docili facultatem legendi, intelligendi et interpretandi.
Debate. Les doy el...
Dice el secretario general.
Legit promissum nobis doctoribus.
Promititis observare et adintere omnia et singula quae secuntur. Primo semper et vinque fueritis, jura et privilegia, honorem studie generalis civitatis Caesar Augustanae conservavitis, et semper jubavitis, favorem, auxilium et consilium prestabilis, in factis et negotis, universitatis quotiens fueritis requisiti,
Accipio promissum vostrum, studium generalis civitatis ses Augustani testis es, e iudes seris si fidem desideretis.
Profesor Don Vinton G.
No, primero y abrazar.
Welcome to this university. Thank you.
Profesor Don Richard Schrock.
My congratulations, Professor Schrock. And welcome to this university. This is now your university. Vamos a proceder a la presentación de los correspondientes nuevos doctores honoris causa de esta universidad. Puede ocupar la cátedra el doctor Vinton Cerf.
Rector Magnifico, academic authorities, distinguished doctors, ladies and gentlemen, there can be little doubt that as the 21st century unfolds, an ever-increasing amount of information is flowing into the Internet's World Wide Web or into digital media such as CD-ROMs, DVDs, and other digital recording media. Moreover, not necessarily easily rendered in simple ways by printing or even electronic display. Some of these digital objects are multimedia in scope, sounds, imagery, motion. Some of them incorporate programmable elements such as spreadsheets, complex documents, electronic mail containing attachments, and embedded complex objects. Some of the digital content that is found on the Internet or in private networking systems and other digital media are interpretable only by special purpose application software. Some of the objects are in fact software in and of themselves. Think of Java programs downloaded in the course of surfing the Internet with a browser. These software snippets are meaningless unless interpreted in the proper context and with the proper software. Other objects are just text until they've been processed by compilers and loaded into a computer for interpretation. The implications of this increasingly diverse digital universe of content are profound. In the absence of appropriate software and hardware platforms, these digital bits are in fact useless data. I've taken to referring to the potential loss of interpretability as bit rot. And I worry that as the decades unfold, the Internet and all other digital media that hold such data will slowly disintegrate into a massive pile of useless, uninterpretable, meaningless data, just a pile of rotten bits. This is not just a problem for the historians and archaeologists of the far future, although I do harbor nightmares that our descendants will wonder what on earth the 20th and 21st centuries were about, and will be unable to find out because we've left behind a midden of bit rot. This is already a current problem for many users of digital technology. Have you ever upgraded your computer operating system, or perhaps bought a new computer, only to discover that some of the digital photographs that you could view with older software suddenly are impossible to display because of software incompatibilities or lack of backwards compatibility? Have you ever tried to display a presentation produced with an earlier version of software using the latest version, only to discover that the older version is not recognized or it's misinterpreted? Can you imagine what might happen in the year 3000 when you were searching the then internet and found a data file from the 21st century but had no way to display it because the software that produced it was long lost? These are all real problems today and will grow increasingly serious as time continues its inexorable march into the future. What is of particular concern is that these complex objects yield their full value only when the appropriate software is available to permit their manipulation, editing, presentation, and use. We no longer have the luxury of preserving these objects by printing or making audio or digital recordings, because the full extent of their interpretation requires much more elaborate contextual treatment using the appropriate application software. These concerns do not even take into account the more obvious problem of physical formats of material falling into disuse. If you can recall the use of 8-inch or 5 1/4-inch floppy disks, or their 3.5-inch successors, you might wonder whether there's any equipment currently available that can read these formats. If there are any left, they may well be in a museum and none operational. The CD-ROMs of today will give way to the DVDs and the HD DVDs of tomorrow, and data recorded on the older formats will become inaccessible. The physical media themselves may deteriorate as well. Who knows how long a polycarbonate CD will actually last? In this essay, I will set aside the problem of physical deterioration on the grounds that one can reasonably imagine copying bits from an older digital medium to another. We see this today as movies are recopied from film to digital DVDs or digital tape. I want to concentrate on the problem of digital data formats and their interpretation over long periods of time, measured in decades to centuries. Software evolves as use and invention dictate. New functionality often demands new and expanded formats. Some changes may not be backward compatible, rendering earlier data files uninterpretable. Even when this is not the case, it seems predictable that some software will fall into disuse and will no longer be maintained. The company or persons supporting the software may cease doing so for a variety of reasons. The implications of these observations are both obvious and subtle. First, it seems important that software that ceases to be commercially available or supported ought to be placed into a category that permits users to access it in some fashion, perhaps through online cloud computing. Moreover, these applications may require certain versions of operating systems to operate properly, so the same concerns about application software may apply to operating systems as well. One could even go so far as to argue that the hardware on which the operating system and application software runs needs to be preserved or emulated so that their functionality is not lost in the future. There are obvious intellectual property issues associated with these questions. Will the source code be made available when a particular version of application or operating software is no longer supported? If not, Is there a way to make the software accessible on the internet so that their functionality is preserved? While there is likely no panacea to assure that all digital information can be preserved over time, it strikes me as important to take steps now to develop techniques and global policy regimes that support this goal. Much has been made thus far of the format of digital data and its interpretability by software. Perhaps it's worth turning to another aspect of this challenge, having to do with the semantics of information. The meaning of words, symbols, and digital formats are central to their utility. Anyone who has sought to read written material from the relatively distant past can appreciate how language evolves and its meanings change. Even in contemporary terms, there's ambiguity that can only be resolved with proper context. In English, the term red can mean a color, or in some contexts, a political persuasion. Of course, in Spanish, it means the net. It is reasonable to ask whether there is any way to establish a general digital semantics that would allow long-term interpretation of digital content, even with the evolution of the application software that interprets it. There have been attempts in the past to create long-lasting representations of syntax of digital information. One example is the so-called abstract syntax notation version 1. This relatively complex standard is intended to allow very general descriptions of complex digital objects so that these descriptions are in some sense self-defining. Without debating the general utility of these methods, it is fair to observe that even when they convey formatting information accurately, there remains the problem of interpreting the meaning of content represented in these formats. A semantic complement to the syntax representation would be an interesting technical challenge. It's almost certain that some efforts have been made in the past or are being made in the future. Another example of an attempt to capture syntax and meaning is found in the Extensible Markup Language, or XML, that has its roots both in the hypertext markup language of the World Wide Web and the earlier standardized generalized markup language from which HTML is derived. Another variation on this theme is the invention of programming languages whose compilers can be programmed in the same language.